What's going on, bottom line viewers? It's Mitch here to take a look at Fantasy ADP. In this video, I'm going to play the ADP game, the average draft position game, round by round, taking a look at the Fantasy Football Calculators ADP and giving you the players that I love, the players that I hate, the players that I'm about in fantasy football in 2020 in each and every round, and giving you the players that you should target and stay away from in every round of fantasy. Before I give you my thoughts on ADP in fantasy for 2020, Gronk spike the like button and subscribe to the Bottom Line View for more fantasy content just like this. If you're interested in what I have to say about ADP for fantasy football 2020, you can check out my fantasy draft board and more fantasy insight on my Patreon. If you subscribe to the Bottom Line View Patreon, $3 for my draft board, the draft board to help you dominate your draft in 2020. All right, so this is, if you don't know it, the Fantasy Football Calculator.com. This is a great resource and website if you are interested in what other people are doing in their drafts and just to get an insight into where certain players are going across the landscape of fantasy football in 2020, so you have a good idea of where you can get certain players. When you're mapping out your draft and your strategy, it's always a good idea to take a look at ADP to see what other people are doing so that you can counter it and build your best team. So let's start off in the first round. Christian McCaffrey is the clear-cut number one pick this year in fantasy football, and I totally get it. He has a great ceiling along with a very solid floor. His receiving game at the running back position is just unmatched, which allows him to be the clear-cut number one pick, because even if he struggles on the ground, you know this guy is capable of having 10 plus receptions in a game. Saquon, to me, is the clear-cut number two, and every single time I was at pick two, I'd pick Saquon, because I think if there's any player that can outproduce McCaffrey, it is Saquon. Not to mention, I do believe Saquon is the most talented running back in the NFL. Zeke is actually at the same ADP, which is interesting to me. I have Zeke as the clear-cut number three pick, but I do not think he should rival Saquon. So at that 2-3 pick, I'd go Saquon, then Zeke. I agree that Alvin Kamara is the number four. Some people have Kamara at number three. Some people have him outside the top five. He's more of one of the divisive guys, I guess you could say, about the running back position. After Kamara and really Dalvin Cook, it becomes interesting at the running back position. I think most people out there have McCaffrey, Barkley, Zeke, Kamara, Cook as their top five running backs. And then after, you'll see a wide range of Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Derrick Henry, Miles Sanders, Josh Jacobs, Joe Mixon, Kenyon Drake, really in the mix in the top 10. Personally, I won't give away the player that I have ranked the highest because it will be on my draft board, but I personally am fading Clyde Edwards-Helaire this year. I'll give you that much, because Clyde, he's a rookie. I have never seen him play. I understand that he has a huge opportunity, and I understand he is very talented. I ranked him as my number one rookie running back from this draft class, period. End of story. Before he was drafted. So I was very high on him. And if you remember, he was actually a surprising pick in the first round. I think he's a perfect match for Kansas City. But the Chiefs don't run the ball a lot. They have so many weapons in the passing game that I'm just not comfortable with taking him with a top 10 pick. I'm comfortable with taking him with a late first or early second, but more than likely he will go to somebody that does fall in love with his skill set, because he certainly is very talented. But I just don't know if I can trust the Chiefs. Derrick Henry is another guy I'm not so high on. So those two I'm not hot on, because Derrick Henry's a guy that just doesn't catch the football. And in PPR leagues, which I play in basically every single one of my leagues is PPR. Now, if it's half or standard, then Derrick Henry's a great pick. I think he would be a top 5 pick, personally. I think if you're playing in standard leagues, Derrick Henry is a top 4 or top 5 pick. When you're talking about PPR, though, I am completely off Derrick Henry because it just takes a game where he has those 20 carries, but he doesn't break any of them for big yardage for him to really mess your team up week in and week out, because he doesn't have that floor of other running backs going in the first round of the receiving game, like McCaffrey, like Saquon, like even Zeke, Kamara, Miles Sanders, Kenyon Drake are capable pass catchers. I think Josh Jacobs will catch more passes. I think Joe Mixon will catch more passes. He and Nick Chubb are the guys that are great in standard leagues, but when you're talking about PPR, they definitely do slide down the board, in my opinion. Now, Miles Sanders, I don't know if I have him in the top 8, but I definitely like him in the first round. Same as Josh Jacobs. Devontae Adams is certainly the number 2 receiver. Michael Thomas is the number 1. Haven't brought him up. Tyreek Hill going with the first pick in the second round is kind of interesting to me, personally. I think that I'm a little lower on him than most other people. When looking at the first round, I guess giving you a couple of the picks and the spots that I like, I do think picking with a top 2 pick this year is ideal. Outside of the top 2 picks, I think 3 isn't terrible. I think having a back-end pick, if it's a 10-man league, the 10th pick or the 12th pick in a 12-man league, just if you're able to snag 2 of those top 14 running backs, that's ideal, in my opinion. Or if you really like one of these top 2 to 3 receivers. I think I have Julio ahead of Tyreek Hill. ADP has Hill going ahead of Julio. I have Julio personally ahead of Tyreek Hill. I think Tyreek Hill is far less consistent. And with my first 2 rounds, at the very least, I want consistency and I want safe over inconsistency. While Tyreek may win you more games than any receiver, from a week-to-week basis, he has the capability of going off for 200 yards, maybe a punt return, whatever, right? But he's not as consistent as a Julio, as an Adams, or as a Thomas. I'd have him a tier lower than those guys. Nick Chubb and Austin Eckler, you can flip back and forth with those guys. Personally, it really depends on your opinion. I like both players. Honestly, I like all these running backs. It's just a matter of where you take them, in my opinion. DeAndre Hopkins, I am kind of on the side of I think Hopkins is not going to be worth his current ADP. I think he's probably going to be closer to the 10th best receiver in fantasy than he is the 3rd best or the 4th best. You know what I mean? I think he's probably going to be somewhere in the top 12, but I think it's probably going to be closer to the bottom end of wide receiver 1 territory than the top end of wide receiver 1. The chemistry, a new offense, a lot of targets that want the football, Christian Kirk, Larry Fitzgerald, Kenyon Drake. I mean, those guys are going to get the ball. So DeAndre Hopkins is an awesome talent, but I'm probably not going to be picking him in many leagues. I am not picking Lamar or Pat Mahomes at their current ADP at all. Aaron Jones, honestly, is kind of surprising with where he's going. I would clump him in with the Austin Ecklers and the Nick Chubbs for sure. Chris Godwin, I think at the back end of the second round is a good pick. I have him personally above DeAndre Hopkins and closer to Tyreek Hill territory. George Kittle is the second tight end off the board. I personally have him as the top tight end this year. I just think that given the situation in San Fran right now where Debo is going to be maybe out for the first part of the season, I think George Kittle is going to get absolutely peppered with targets. And I expect his touchdown numbers to rise this year, as he was pretty unfortunate in that category last year. Todd Gurley, I think, is going too high. I'm not going to be taking Todd Gurley in any league. I'm saying that right now. Unless he falls to the 4th or 5th round, I'm not picking Todd Gurley. I just am not comfortable with his physical capability this year. Any moment, the guy could get hurt, and I'm cheering for him to do me, wrong, let's say, but I don't see it. I'd way rather pick Chris Carson, James Conner, even Le'Veon Bell than Todd Gurley. Hey, give me David Johnson over Todd Gurley, in my opinion. I think Adam Thielen is a sleeper in the 3rd round. I actually like these 3rd round receivers a lot, specifically the top 4. Kenny Golladay, I love this year. Mike Evans, I still like, while some people are fading him. I think he's going to be just as good as any other year. I mean, look at the guy's consistency with any quarterback. It doesn't matter. The system is what's important for Arians and Evans. And the system is going to dictate that he gets the football. Adam Thielen, I think, is probably a PPR guy that not enough people are high on, in my opinion. I think he's going to get a lot of catches this year because Diggs is gone. Odell Beckham Jr. is another guy. He's one of my favorite players in the NFL, and so maybe I'm slightly biased, but I do see him as a top 10 receiver in fantasy this year. I think last year you could chalk it up mostly to pretty much bad chemistry with his quarterback, and the offense was absolutely dreadful, but all the indications are there. I mean, he was targeted a lot. The air yards were very high. I think his touchdown number will go up. I think the efficiency will go up this year for Odell, which will make him a top receiver. And I think, honestly, he's a sleeper right now. I think he is a value where he's being picked. I'm trying not to pick Leonard Fournette, but I realize that a lot of other people are doing the same thing. So he might actually slide to me in a couple of drafts, and I'll just be forced to take him because the volume is going to be there for him. It's a matter of efficiency. Melvin Gordon's the opposite. I think Melvin Gordon is going to be really efficient this year, but I don't see him having the same volume he had with the Chargers. I actually think the Broncos' run game is going to be really good. Allen Robinson is a guy that I don't necessarily want to pick, but he's safe. I think he's going to get a lot of targets. He probably will have close to 100 receptions again, but he's in such a bad offense with such a terrible quarterback situation that it is hard for me to pick him. Juju, I think, is being overdrafted. DJ Moore, I would pick over Juju. I would pick Amari over Juju. I would pick Ridley and Kupp over Juju. I would pick Robert Woods over Juju. And I would pick Robert Woods over Cooper Kupp. Jonathan Taylor, yes, high upside, but the lack of receiving game has me a little worried in PPR leagues to be picking him in the early 4th round. I'd probably lean to the later 4th round or the 5th round. David Montgomery has all the opportunity in the world, but again, that's a terrible offensive line. But, you know, he's not a bad running back too to have because of the load he's going to carry for that offense. Devin Singletary, I think, is being way overdrafted. I could see Zach Moss actually outperforming him this year because he is a far more efficient player and actually better runner and maybe even better receiver. A.J. Brown, I think, could be a blockbuster pick for anyone. I think he's going to have the weeks where he's a little bit down. But then again, I mean, this is the thing about A.J. Brown. I think people aren't taking into account that the Titans more than likely won't be as good at running the football. They won't be beating teams into the ground like they were a year ago, meaning they're going to have to pass the ball more. And when you look at the weapons around for Tannehill, A.J. Brown is clearly his number one option. And this guy is one of the best after catch receivers in the NFL, period. Maybe the best. I mean, he's that good. He reminds me kind of a T.O. in that regard. Mark Andrews, I feel, is being fairly drafted. Mark Ingram, again, if J.K. Dobbins wasn't drafted, he'd be probably going in the late 2nd, I think. But because Mark Ingram has J.K. Dobbins looking over his shoulder, or Ingram's having to look over his shoulder at the rookie, that has people scared. And I'm willing to take Mark in the 5th round every day of the week. DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, I like both of them. I think ADP is correct here. I think Metcalf has a higher ceiling, which is probably why he's going higher. DJ Chark, I think, is being underdrafted. I think, he is by far, just like AJ Brown, I think they're very similar players. They're not going to have a lot of catches, but what they do with their catches, the efficiency of what they do with those targets is going to be very high. And I think Minshew, the Jags, they're going to be trailing a lot. Chark is the clear number one guy, and he is a freak athlete and has really good matchups. If you look at the division, I mean, they don't have any really good corners in that division. So Chark should feast as well as Brown. Raheem Mostert, I've been high and I've been down on. I mean, San Francisco's tough to figure out with the running back situation, but they do have a really good run game. Zach Ertz, I think, is fairly being drafted in the 5th round. He's just very consistent. Not sexy, but consistent. I'm low on Keenan Allen. I'm high on Terry McLaurin. Kareem Hunt, I probably won't get in the 5th round, but if he slides to the 6th, I'll be happy to pick him. T.Y. Hilton, I am fading this year just because he's just absolutely destroyed my teams in a couple of seasons, and he's older. I don't see the upside that he used to have with Andrew Luck. The deep ball, I think, is not going to be there this year. I think it's going to be a run-heavy team. If he's my wide receiver 3, I'll be fine with that. But anything more than that, I don't think he's going to be able to provide. Russell Wilson, again, quarterback, 5th round. I think Wilson is being overdrafted. I personally think Dak will be better. I think Kyler could be better. I think even Josh Allen could be better than Russell Wilson in fantasy. Not to say Wilson is bad, but I just think those guys have maybe higher ceilings than him. And Watson as well. DeAndre Swift, I like, but I'm still kind of waiting to see what's going on with that situation. Ronald Jones is finally being drafted properly. Cam Akers is, and people still hate Ronald Jones for some reason. Did you actually watch him play last year? I mean, he's a good player. Cam Akers, I don't know. I probably won't be picking him just because I have no idea what's going on. Not to say that's not a good situation. He has a lot of upside if he gets that starting role, but I just don't know. Cortland Sutton, I think, is being probably a little overdrafted, but I could see why people would be drafting him in the late 5th round. Darren Waller, I think, is being kind of weirdly underdrafted, considering that Darren Waller was amazing last year. And yes, I understand they brought in Henry Ruggs, but I still think Waller will be the highest reception guy in this offense. AJ Green in the early 6th round, I'm probably not going to be drafting. But I will say that I think AJ Green is probably going to be on one of my teams just to see if he can break out, or not necessarily break out, but get back to being old AJ Green. Stephon Diggs, Marquise Brown. I love Marquise Brown a lot this year. I think he has a safer floor than a lot of people think, and I think his ceiling is absolutely huge. I mean, really, outside of Andrews, who is getting the football in the passing game? And they will pass the ball more this year. And Lamar is a competent passer. Stephon Diggs, I think, is interesting. I think people are sleeping on the fact that he's going to be better utilized underneath as opposed to over top. Everyone talks about Diggs in terms of his deep ability, but he is a guy that can move all over the formation. They're going to put him in the slot somewhat sometimes. They're going to get him open. He's going to be utilized more like John Brown was last year as an intermediate and deep threat, not just a deep threat like he was in Minnesota for the most part. Devontae Parker probably won't be picking very much of. James White is safe. J.K. Dobbins, people love him. Rob Gronkowski, I think, is probably being overdrafted, but I do think that he deserves to be like the 8th tight end off the board, somewhere around there. Edelman is probably being underdrafted just because he's going to be another season of target machinedom. Brandon Cooks, I think, shouldn't be being drafted over Will Fuller. I think Will Fuller is the guy with the chemistry of the quarterback, and Will Fuller has a much higher ceiling. When Will Fuller has been on the field, he has arguably been a top 20 receiver in the NFL. Michael Gallup, I think a lot of people already know. If you've been watching any fantasy stuff, I mean, a lot of people love him. Jordan Howard, probably, I'm higher on him than Breida, so there's that. Matt Ryan, Drew Brees, they're safe, but I probably wouldn't be picking them in the 7th. Jarvis Landry, Tyler Boyd, safe receivers. Antonio Gibson, I think, is going to ultimately be overdrafted. Same as Tariq Cohen, same as Tevin Coleman. I'm not picking those guys. They have no upside to me at all. They're floor plays at the best. And even if Coleman, if for some reason Mostert gets injured, I think McKinnon will be involved, and I think McKinnon is actually better than Coleman. Tyler Higbee, you guys know I love him. Deebo Samuel, I'm not picking because he's hurt. Tom Brady, Aaron Rodgers. Tom Brady should be drafted over Drew Brees and Matt Ryan, in my opinion. Phillip Lindsay, I don't know what his load's going to be like. I don't know what his touch total is going to be like. Marvin Jones is always underdrafted. Classic. Josh Allen is way underdrafted considering where the other quarterbacks are being drafted because he has that rushing upside. Sony Michel, I'm not drafting because I don't know if he's going to be healthy. CD, I think it's actually properly drafted considering I think the fact that he might be the 3rd receiver and that he's on the Cowboys has kind of balanced his stock. It's kind of funny. Henry Ruggs, I have as my number 1 rated rookie receiver. Mecole Hardman has huge upside. Darius Slayton, I'd probably be drafting over Hardman though. Hardman is probably being overdrafted, but he is a guy that I understand why people are drafting him where they're drafting him, if that makes any sense. Jamison Crowder, if you're in need of a receiver 3 late in the draft, that is your guy. Jerry Jeudy, Christian Kirk, these guys are fine. I think Adrian Peterson's going to continue to move up. Cam Newton's going to continue to move up. I think Matthew Stafford is starting to get some buzz as well. Jalen Reagor starting to get some buzz. Even though I don't know if he's the number one in that offense, it might be actually Deshaun Jackson, who's right there at 1109. So that is ADP. Damian Harris is interesting. I'm waiting to hear more about this Patriot running back situation. Brandon Ayuk is going to continue to rise as Shanahan continues to gush over him. And stop picking kickers above Allen Lazard, please, and John Brown. Can we stop doing that? Mike Gesicki is going to continue to rise. Surprised he's actually going lower than TJ Hawkinson. I guess, TJ kind of has that first round hype, even though I like TJ and I like Jonnu Smith. Yeah, so that is ADP. I went through every round, a lot of players. Let me know in the comments who your favorite guys are to draft in 2020. Hopefully I gave you a good indication of the guys that I like, the guys that I love, and the guys that I don't so like or love. Leave yours in the comment section below. It's Mitch. Make sure you do check out the Bottom Line View Patron, $3 for the month, and you will get the fantasy football draft board that I'm bringing to all of my drafts, including high stakes drafts, and I'll be utilizing to try to win fantasy championships in 2020. So if you guys enjoyed, make sure you do Gronk spike that like button and stick around for more fantasy football this week and during the 2020 NFL season. It's Mitch. Peace.